Hello guys, welcome to another session. In this session, we are going to look into updating lifecycle methods. So let's start our discussion. Updating phase of React component lifecycle contains 5 methods. These method is being called when component is being re-rendered because of changes either in props or states. In the updating phase, the first method which is being executed is the static get derived state from props, which we have already seen when we were discussing about mounting phase. This method receives props and state as a parameter and returns the updated state when it is being re-rendered. You can also return null in this method. You should remember that whenever a component is being re-rendered, this method gets called. This method we generally use to set the state from prop to new state. So what you don't use in this method, you don't use the side effects like HTTP call in this method, and this method used very rarely. So now let's proceed further and discuss about should component update. In the execution cycle of the updating phase, this is the second method which gets executed after a static get derived state from props method. This method accepts next props and next state as an argument, and this method dictates whether component should re-render or not. By default, all the class component should re-render whenever it receives props and state. But we can stop the default behavior by returning false. How we can use this method? We can compare the current prop and state values with the next props and state values, and if there is a change, then we can re-render the component. So now the question over here is, why do we use this method? So we generally use to optimize the performance. So what should we don't do in this method? Again, over here we will not perform any of the side effects like HTTP calls. So now let's proceed further and discuss about the render method. This method we already know about it. This method also gets called whenever the component gets updated. As we already discussed about, this method accepts the props and state and returns the JSX. We have also discussed about don't use this method to change the state or interact with the DOM, and also don't perform any of the AJAX call. So once render method gets executed within the updating phase, the another method which gets executed is the get snapshot before update. This method accepts previous state and the previous props. This method gets called right before the changes from the virtual DOM are to be reflected in the DOM. This method is very rarely used, and it can be used to capture the information from the DOM. Get snapshot before update either return null or some process data which we can use in component did update method. So now let's discuss about the component did update method. Component did update called after render method in the re-render cycle. This method accepts 3 parameters: previous props, previous state, as well as the snapshot value which we have processed in the get snapshot before update method. One thing you have to remember about this component did update is it will be called only once in the re-render cycle, and this is the place where you can perform the AJAX call or say side effects. You can perform HTTP calls to the services to fetch the data and use the data into the component. One best practices which I wanted to share with you: whenever you are using component did update for AJAX call, you should compare the previous props and the new props and then decide the AJAX call. If you don't perform this comparison, then every time you need to perform the service call, and that is really not a good practice. So let's jump into the Visual Studio Code to see all this thing in action. So to demonstrate all the methods of updating phase, I am going to use the same example which I have used in earlier session. So the first method which gets executed is the get derived state from prop while updating phase, while doing the update, as it is already there, so I'm not going to write it. The another method which gets executed is the should component update. So let's write it, should component update, and here we will console log it, console.log should component update. You can tell parent should component update method and make sure that you are returning true. Return true. Save it. Now let's proceed further. The third method is already in place, that is render. So if you go there, then you will find over here the render method. Now the fourth method is get snapshot before update. So let's use it, get snapshot before update, and over here prep props comma prep state, and within that we will console.log parent get snapshot before update. Let's save it. And the last method is component did update, and we will call it and over here we need to specify console.log, and we will specify parent component did update. Save it. So now we have introduced all the 5 methods which gets executed while update phase. So let me put the same methods into the child component. So let's copy it, all these 4. This is already there. These 3 we can copy it and go to the child component, and over here we will put, and this time we will mention child, child and child. Save it. So now the next step is we will introduce a button which will trigger the change in the state, and once the state gets changed, the update phase of component gets triggered. So let's do it. So let's go to the parent component and let's introduce a button over here. So we will tell that button, and over here we will put a on click event, and here we will specify this dot on click event, one method which arrow function we need to define, and over here we will tell that update phase demo, and over here take this one, and here you need to specify on click event equal to, this is going to be an arrow function, and within that we will do this dot set state, and we will update over here. We are having a properties called name, and we will update it parent update demo. Save it, and this one also we will put it into div. So let's put it, cut this one, save it. Now let's go to the browser to see the output. You know what, we are doing a mistake over here, so get it rectified. I told that we need to either return null whenever we are using get snapshot before update, or the next props or state. So this time we will return null, and make sure that you are repeating the same into the child component. So here also you need to specify that. Save this one, this one. So now let's jump into the browser to see the output. So over here you will find that this is the mounting phase methods gets executed. To demonstrate the update phase method, I need to clear this output and click on update phase demo, so that state gets updated and the update phase gets triggered. So let's do it, and then you will find that the update method gets triggered. So see here, first it get triggered, the get derived state from prop method gets triggered of the parent, then the should component update, then the render method of the parent, and once it is being rendered, within that we are having a child component. So again the child component get derived state from prop method gets executed. After that child should component update method gets executed, then child component render method gets called, then child gets snapshot before update gets called, and then over here parent gets snapshot before update gets executed, and after that child component did update get executed, and at last parent component did update gets executed. So this is the order of execution. So let's proceed further. So now we have seen the updating phase. So now we will discuss about the remaining lifecycle phases, that is unmounting, which has component will unmount. This method we generally use to do the cleanup task like cancelling any network request, removing event handlers, cancelling any subscriptions. So now the question over here is, what is not to do in this method? So my answer is, don't use setState method in this method, as it is a unmounting phase. So component will never re-render in this phase. So now let's proceed further and discuss about error handling. This phase of life cycle gets triggered whenever any error gets occurred, and this phase offers us 2 methods. First one is the static get derived state from error, and the second one is the component did catch. In a simple term, I can say that these methods gets executed when there is an error, either during the rendering in a lifecycle method or in a constructor of any child components. These lifecycle method I am going to cover in detail in the upcoming session when I will discuss about error boundaries. So this is what I wanted to show you in this session. See you in the next session. Till then, bye bye, take care.